How to train your brain for difficult things. Dopamine detox. You probably don't have any problem playing video games or browsing social media on your phone. I have no doubt that you could sit in front of a screen and do both of these activities for many hours, or even longer without breaking your attention. But what about half an hour of studying? That might be too hard. How about working on your side business for another hour? It does not sound too appealing. Even though you logically know that studying, exercising, building a business or something equally productive will bring more benefits in the long run, you still prefer watching TV, playing games, and scrolling through the internet. One activity is easy and doesn't require much effort, while the other activity is difficult and requires you to apply yourself. But some people seem to have no problem in studying, exercising, or working on their side business regularly. Which arises the question, why are some people motivated to undertake difficult things? And is there any way to make difficult things easy? To answer this question, we need to look at this brain neurotransmitter, dopamine. Dopamine is often considered a pleasure molecule, but that's not quite what it does. Dopamine is what makes us desire to do things, and it's that desire which gives us the motivation to get up and do stuff. If you're not sure how powerful dopamine is, let me introduce you to a few experiments that neuroscientists did on rats. The researchers implanted electrodes in the brains of rats. Whenever the rat pulled a lever, the researchers stimulated the rat's reward system in the brain. The result was that the rats developed a craving so strong that they keep pulling the lever for hours. The rats would deny eating or even sleeping. But when the process was reversed, the researchers blocked the release of dopamine in the brain's reward center. Rats became so inactive that even getting up to get a drink of water was not worth the effort. You could say that the rats lost all will to live. However, if the food was placed directly in their mouths, the rats would eat and enjoy the food. They just didn't have the motivation to get up and do it themselves. You guess that it's thirst or hunger that motivates us to get food or water. But there's also dopamine that plays a key role here. Those rat experiments might be extreme cases, but you can see similar effects that dopamine has in humans in our daily lives. Your brain develops preferences in large part based on how much dopamine it's required to get. If an activity releases too little dopamine, you won't have much motivation to do it. But if an activity releases a lot of dopamine, you'll be motivated to repeat it, over and over. So which behaviors release dopamine? Any activity where you predict there's a possible reward releases it. But if you know that there are no immediate rewards with the behavior, your brain won't release it. For example, before you eat comfort food, your brain releases dopamine because you anticipate that the food will make you feel good, even if it makes you feel worse. That's because your brain does not even care if the high dopamine activity is damaging you. It just wants more of it. Of course, it has to be noted that nearly everything releases some amount of dopamine. Even drinking the water when you're thirsty. But the highest dopamine releases when you get a reward randomly. One of the best examples is playing on a slot machine in a casino. Even if you have only been losing money until that point, you eventually expect to get a bigger reward. You just don't know when it could happen. And in today's digital society, we are flooding our brains with unnaturally high amounts of dopamine daily, even if we don't know it. Some examples of high dopamine behaviors are scrolling through social media, playing video games, watching the internet, etc. We expect some sort of reward with each one of those behaviors. That's why we're constantly checking our phones. We expect to see some text message or some other notification. And we know that eventually, we're going to receive it. We are becoming like those rats pulling the lever, trying to get new dopamine hit. Our bodies have a biological system called homeostasis. It means that our body likes to keep the internal physical and chemical conditions at a balanced level. Whenever an imbalance occurs, our body adapts to it. Let me give you an example. When it's cold outside, our body temperature falls. And as a result, we start shivering to generate heat to warm the body. However, when it's hot outside, our body temperature rises. And we start sweating to lose some of that heat. Essentially, our body is looking to maintain a temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius, but there is another way homeostasis manifests itself. And that is through patience. For example, someone who rarely drinks alcohol will get drunk fast. But someone who drinks regularly will have to drink more alcohol because their body has developed a tolerance to it. Essentially, it takes alcohol to make them drunk because they've become less sensitive to its effects. And it's not much different with dopamine. Your body tries to maintain homeostasis, so it regulates your dopamine receptors. Essentially, your brain gets used to having high levels of dopamine, and those levels become your new normal. Thus, you develop a dopamine tolerance. This can be a huge problem, because the things that don't give you as much dopamine don't interest you any longer. And it's much more difficult to motivate yourself to do them. They feel bored and less fun because they do not release much dopamine, compared to the things that do release it in high amounts. That's why people prefer playing video games or browsing social media, compared to studying or working on their business. Video games make us feel good and comfortable, as they release a lot of dopamine. Sadly, things like working hard or reading release in lower amounts. This is one of the reasons why drug addicts who try to quit have a hard time adjusting to a normal life. Their dopamine tolerance gets so high that normal life isn't able to match it. They become like those rats from previous experiments who have no motivation to do anything if there's not enough dopamine release. And it's not just drug addicts. People who are addicted to video games, social media, or the internet experience the same thing. Once their dopamine tolerance gets too high, they simply aren't able to enjoy low dopamine behaviors. These raises the question, is there anything that can be done to prevent this? The answer is you need to perform a dopamine detox. By now might already have an idea what dopamine detox is going to look like. What you're going to do is set aside a day, where you're going to avoid all the highly stimulating activities. You are going to stop flooding your brain with high amounts of dopamine, and you are going to let your dopamine receptors recover. Now back to the detox. For one whole day, you will try to have a little fun as possible. You won't be using the internet or any device like your phone or computer. You're not allowed to listen music, you're not allowed to eat any junk food. You're going to remove all sources of external pleasure for that entire day. You're going to adopt boredom. And trust me, there will be a lot of boredom. You are, however, allowed to do the following things: go for a walk. Reflect on your life and goals. Meditate and be alone with your thoughts. Write down any ideas you get. Not on your computer or phone, but in a physical paper. All of this might seem a little intense. But if you want radical results and you want them fast, you need to be able to take radical action. Let's say that you are eating every single meal at the best restaurant in your city. As a result, what happened is that those fancy meals have become your new normal routine. If someone offered you a bowl of plain rice, you would probably refuse it. It simply wouldn't taste as good as your usual restaurant meal. But if you suddenly find yourself stranded on a deserted island and you're starving, suddenly that bowl of plain rice doesn't seem so bad. And that is what the dopamine detox does. It hungers you of all the pleasure that you usually get, and in return, it makes those less satisfying activities more attractive. Now, if you don't want to take such extreme action and starve yourself of all the pleasure, you can perform a smaller dopamine detox. You have to pick one day of the week where you're going to avoid one of your high dopamine behaviors completely. Whatever that behavior might be. Maybe checking your phone all the time, playing video games on your computer, watching TV, eating junk food, whatever. And from now, every single week for one whole day, you're going to avoid that activity. You can still do other things, but the behavior you pick is off the limits. Yes, you will feel slightly bored, but that's the point. You let your dopamine receptors recover from the unnaturally high dopamine that's flooding your brain. And boredom is going to motivate you to do other things that day. Things that you would normally put off because they don't release as much dopamine. And because you're bored, it's easier for you to do them. Avoiding high dopamine behavior once in a while is good, but ideally, you should avoid those behaviors altogether, or as much as possible. Instead, you want to connect more dopamine to the things that will benefit you. And what I found is that your current high dopamine activities can serve as an incentive to pursue things that give you those long-term benefits. In other words, you use your high dopamine activity as a reward for completing difficult work. And this is exactly I do myself. I will track all the difficult, low dopamine work that I do. Cleaning my house, practicing the piano, reading books, doing some exercise, etc. After I'm able to get a certain amount of work done, I reward myself with some amount of high dopamine activity. If I indulge in high dopamine behavior first, then I'm not going to feel like doing the low dopamine work. So I always start with the difficult things, only then I allow myself to indulge in high dopamine activities. To give you an example, for every hour of low dopamine work, I reward myself with 15 minutes of high dopamine behavior at the end of the day. That means that for 8 hours of low dopamine, I allow myself 2 hours of high dopamine behavior. Of course, these are my ratios. You can change them in your way. Also, it has to be noted that if you're addicted to something that's damaging your health, then you don't want to treat that behavior as a reward. Instead, find a different reward that's not as damaging, one that you still think is worth the effort. And if you are wondering what my guilty pleasure is the internet. I can easily get lost there for hours without doing anything else. That's why I have this system. It's so I'm able to control my addiction. But make no mistake, even with this system, I still plan days where I abstain from high dopamine activities completely. I want to say that if it is possible to make doing difficult things feel easier. But when your brain is getting so much dopamine all the time, you won't be as excited about working on something that doesn't release much of it. That's why you might want to limit your phone and computer usage, along with other high dopamine releasing behavior. So if you have motivation problems, start dopamine detoxing your brain as soon as possible. Separate yourself from the unnaturally high amounts of dopamine, or at least expose yourself to it far less frequently. Only then will normal, everyday, low dopamine activities become exciting again and you will be able to do them for a longer time. We are all dopamine addicts to a certain extent. And that's a good thing because dopamine motivates us to achieve our goals and improve ourselves. But it's all up to you to decide where you are going to get your dopamine from. Are you going to get it from things that don't benefit you? Or are you going to get it from working on your goals? The choice is all yours. Okay guys, if you enjoyed this video then please give a big like, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. If you feel like this video has given you some value then please let us know in the comments down below. We want to know if we should make more videos like this for you guys, because we care about our community. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching and we will see you on the next video.